Welcome to In God We Trusted. My name is Will, and I am the host. I'm here alongside Sam. Sam, what are we talking about today?
Today we're going to be talking about one of the things that comes up all the time when you're talking about this particular election, which is we have candidates that a lot of people find both of them objectionable.
Of course.
There's lots of reasons to find pause, to be like, oh, I wish I had somebody better to choose, but we don't. And so how does a Christian come into this particular election with candidates that have very obvious flaws that are evident to everybody and make a decision with a clear conscience to vote for what's going to be best for righteousness?
Because really, this election, of all elections maybe that we've ever seen as a Christian coming into it, it would be very easy to use a third-party candidate, to use a write-in, or just to skip the president block. Hey, I'm going to vote for everybody else, but I'm morally not going to pick one of those two.
That's right. And so one of the arguments that you hear all the time is, essentially what this election comes down to is you're voting for the lesser of two evils.
Yeah.
Anytime you have a decision to make between two human beings, you're voting for the lesser of two evils because every human being is a flawed human being. Jesus isn't on the ballot, unfortunately. And so then comes the question, as a Christian, how do you make the vote for somebody that you think is going to be bad? Or is it better as a Christian to say, you know what? Choosing between the lesser of two evils is still choosing evil, so I'm just not going to vote. And then coming to terms with the fact that that actually is advancing evil. Apathy and deciding to say, you know what, I'm out, is actually advancing evil more so than choosing the lesser of two. I mean, the cause of righteousness calls you to say, you know what, let's slow the train down. If both of these have parts of them that are bad, let's pick the one that leads to less bad, more righteousness. That's the obligation of the Christian citizen.
Yeah, we want to start this conversation about the lesser of two evils in Scripture where there's some warnings for us.
That's right. So you go back into the Bible. When you're in 1 Samuel chapter 8, Israel had a theocracy, which is terrible. And the Bible shows us that a theocracy is terrible because people cannot be trusted with that kind of authority. They're wicked. We're wicked. Mm-hmm. People get power and they abuse it. But then they say, we want a king, right? And in 1 Samuel 8, you get the prophet Samuel with God's anointing who comes to the people and he's like, you don't understand what you're asking for. When you ask for a man to rule over you, let me tell you what's going to come. Now go read those warnings in 1 Samuel chapter 8, because what he says is they're going to abuse their adversaries. Anybody who stands in the way, they're going to drive in the dirt. They're going to exploit the poor. They're going to take advantage of everything in the nation for their own personal benefit. They're going to enrich their friends unfairly. It's going to be unjust whenever you entrust humanity with power to rule over you. They're going to do the bad thing. And you see that throughout the Bible. Like when Joseph, who's the heroic figure of Genesis, during the famine, he had stored up all the grain, right? And when all the nations were coming to him, he's saving them from starvation. But here's what he's also doing is when the Egyptians come for their food, he says, okay, in payment, I want you to give me all of your livestock. I want you to give me all of your money. I want you to give me all of your land. And eventually, what a lot of people fail to realize in that story is it says that Joseph reduced the people of Egypt to servitude. Now, how did that happen? All of the power had been consolidated in Pharaoh. The people lost all of their private individual liberties and their independence. It was all consolidated to the government. And before you knew it, they're enslaved. And it was, Joseph enslaved the Egyptians one moment, but eventually there's somebody who forgets about Joseph, and the Pharaoh's like, Joseph who? And guess what happens? Then all of Joseph's people get enslaved. That's the nature of entrusting humanity with too much power. In the book of Nehemiah, you have Nehemiah talking about how they're having to mortgage their kids and sell their kids into slavery because of taxes to the government. Like you see this again and again and again where the government is going to abuse power. One of the things that our founders understood because they believed the Bible was that humanity is depraved, can't be trusted with power. You give them too much, they will exploit. And so when you look at the Constitution, you know what the main driving force of the Constitution is? One of the main goals of the whole thing?
Balance of powers.
Balance of powers. We have to restrict the government from getting too much power to where the people now live in fear of the government because the government runs all of their life. And so in the Constitution, what do you find? You find checks and balances. You find 3 different branches. You find an incredibly complicated process to amend the Constitution. You find the separation of powers. You find all of these things that frustrate the ability of one person to gain more and more power. And that's why the Constitution's brilliant, is because it prevents human depravity and our lust for power from running out of control. And what I would say is we're getting closer and closer to the days where the Constitution is being neglected. People are abusing powers. The state and its bureaucracies are out of control. And right now, the people fear their leaders. And the Constitution was meant to prevent that from happening.
And yeah, it's crazy that we were talking about this recently. The New York Times posted about the Constitution being dangerous to us as people. We're flinging the whole wrong way of what the Constitution is supposed to be.
Yeah, that's right. I mean, the idea of limited government's now getting in the way of our ability to just do whatever we want, to where you have institutions like the New York Times saying, maybe we should just get rid of it. It's dangerous. It's limiting us. That's not good. And the reality is, just like we talked about, the very best characters in Scripture, men like Solomon. Like Solomon is lifted up as a great king. He's got wisdom and wealth and everything else. But when Deuteronomy chapter 17, verses 15 to 17, go read those. Listen to the commands that are given for any future king over Israel. It says, he must not acquire great numbers of horses for himself or make the people return to Egypt. Guess what Solomon does?
Tons of horses.
Tons of horses from Egypt. Says that he's not to acquire great amounts of silver and gold. Guess what Solomon does?
Loves silver and gold.
Not to take massive numbers of wives from foreign lands. Like,
didn't even know all their names.
Right, like he's got hundreds. And so even with Solomon, once he has power, even though he's been told right and wrong, he can't help it. Power is just too much of a temptation to enrich yourself. And so that's where we have to understand, no matter who we put in that office, they're fallen people. You're always choosing between the lesser of 2 evils. And Solomon's son, living with all that privilege and power, what does he do? When the people come and say, can we please have rest? He tries to drive them into the ground, and it splits the kingdom of Israel. It'll never be united again. The 10 tribes part away. So all that to say, we're dealing with broken people. You're always, in a democracy, you're always choosing the lesser of 2 evils.
And which is why voting exists, that we as people have the final say in it.
Mm-hmm. That's 100% true. I heard an illustration that goes like this. I thought it was helpful.
Okay.
But they were like, if you were in a burning house, right, and you had a pathway into the burning house to save 10 babies that were all in strollers or cribs or whatever, and one path takes you to this person, one path takes you to this person, one path takes you to that person, and all of them would be able to help you. And so you've got to make a quick decision. Path number 1 takes you to a man who's got a pack of matches and a can of gasoline, and he's snickering.
Okay.
He set the fire. You don't want him to help you save the kids in the house.
He just wants more fire.
He wants more fire. He's terrible. He's the problem to start with. So we don't pick him. He's easy to cross off. Now the next guy comes along and he says, I'll go, but I'm only saving boys. All the girls are going to have to stay in there because I despise them. They have to stay in there. And you're like, well, that guy's not good.
Not the best choice.
Not the best choice. And you come to the third room and you hear the guy and he says, I love all of human life. I am desperate to save human life. This is the greatest desire of my heart. And you look at him and he's paralyzed from the neck down.
Not helpful at all.
Not helpful at all. He's going to save 0 babies no matter how morally pure he is. Which of the 3 is the wise choice to choose to help you save the people in the burning building?
Guy number 2.
Guy number 2. Even though he's morally reprehensible and he's, bigoted or whatever, like you wouldn't want him to train up your kids. You wouldn't want him to be, a husband to your daughter. And yet he is the one who is going to do the most amount of good. And so your obligation is what? To pick him. Now, you could throw a well, I'm not going to support you. I'm going to pick the paralyzed guy with the clean conscience. But the result of that's going to be what?
More death.
More death. And so you have to pick the one that's going to give you the greatest chance to bring about life. Period. I thought that was a really helpful
That is,
analogy.
because when you think of the lesser of two evils, it can get either really philosophic or really, but breaking that down helps us out a lot.
Mm-hmm. And you see, by the way, that in Scripture, there are times when God rewards people for choosing the lesser of two evils. And like you think of the midwives, right? Back in the days of Moses, when Pharaoh's like, I want to kill all the Hebrew baby boys, what do the midwives do?
They lie.
They totally lie. They're like, oh, these Hebrew women, they give birth too fast. We can't get there to kill the babies in time. They're totally lying. And what does it say? God was pleased with them, and so he was kind to the midwives. And it's like, but they lied. They chose the lesser of two evils. And God is like, and thank the Lord they did, because it saved lives. That's weird.
Because it brought life, not death.
It brought life, not death. Or you think to the Magi who pledged to Herod that they're going to return to him, and yet they go back another way. They don't tell him where Jesus is or that he's been born. Or think of another one where Rahab, when Jericho is sacked, she hides the spies, and when they come looking for the spies, of course, to kill them, and they're like, do you have anybody here? What does she say? Nope. And that is pleasing to God. Rahab's mentioned in the Hall of Faith in Hebrews 11 as somebody that's to be admired. So you see this time and time again, where does God want you to lie? No. But does God want you to lie if it's going to save lives?
Yes.
Yes. And that's a really weird philosophic thing. So again, in Scripture, you see warrant for choosing the lesser of two evils.
And you shouldn't be running into that choice every single day.
Correct.
Like this
Correct.
is not, this is an abnormal situation that you find yourself in, it's an emergency situation where for life to flourish, you have to lie. And those, I mean, of all the examples in the Bible, that's not tons of examples, but it does happen.
That's right. You think of the Nazis that were hiding Jews or something like that. Or do you have Jews here? Or the Germans, that were hiding Jews. And the Nazis come and they say, are you hiding anybody here? And they say, no, that's a righteous thing to do. Or the Underground Railroad, which is, trying to get slaves to escape into freedom. It is righteous to conceal them, to disguise them, to do whatever you have to do. In World War II, when we do military tactics to throw off the enemy, and we're using deceit and we're creating fake tanks and all that stuff on the coastline of England to throw the Germans off, that's lying. And it's righteous to defeat evil. And so, again, in this election, you're going to have to pull the ballot for somebody that you might find morally repugnant, but who's going to lead to a greater chance of flourishing for humanity and life to emerge in our country. You have a righteous obligation to support that, I think.
And I think something that confuses us as Christians is we try to equate the two with each other. Like the civil office and the church offices, we try to like mirror them together and say, okay, what happens in the civil courts and what happens in our churches are under the same rules. But they're not, right?
They're not. They're absolutely not. Like, if you were to come to me and to tell me both of these candidates for the major parties was applying to be an elder in a church, I would tell you both of them are absolutely disqualified. Without question, it is beyond debate. Like, this is what's required to be an elder. You have to be the husband of one wife, temperate, self-controlled, respectable, hospitable, able to teach, not a drunk, not violent, not quarrelsome, not a lover of money, manages his family well, not a recent convert, a good reputation. So, and above reproach, by the way. Both of the major candidates for the presidential office right now are disqualified morally. Vice President Harris launched her political career by having an affair with a married man, Willie Brown, when he was an elected representative in the California legislature and was appointed to different boards. And he was still married while she was dating him. So she's got skeletons in her closet, was appointed to different positions where she made lots of money, even though she had no experience with a medical background, being appointed to medical boards, all kinds of shady stuff, right? So shady over here. Over here, you got a guy that's
not hiding anything.
That's been married 3 times, has been divorced, has been accused of infidelity, is on tape making reprehensible statements about what he has done to women, and then being like, oh, it was just locker room talk or whatever. But if I look at both of them, You cannot be an elder in the church. You are not above reproach. There is scandal that's all over you. You can't have a church office, right? Now go over to what the civic requirements are in Scripture. So when we find this in like Exodus 18:21, when Jethro is telling Moses, like, you can't do this all on your own. You need to surround yourself with help to administrate the people of Israel. And what does he say? He says, moreover, look for able men from all the people, men who fear God, who are trustworthy, hate a bribe, and place such men over the people as chiefs of thousands, hundreds, fifties, tens. So what do you notice there? Now all of a sudden it's like, yes, they need to fear God. They need to not take a bribe. They need to not be in it for themselves, but it's more focused on they need to be able. They need to be capable. They need to be competent. They need to be able to do the job. Deuteronomy chapter 1, verse 13. Listen to the list here. It's way different than the requirements for deacons or elders. And there, God says, choose for your tribes wise, understanding, experienced men, and I will appoint them as your heads. What do you not find in that? He's not saying, hey, I need angels that are above reproach that do all these things. It's wisdom, understanding, experience. I want competence. Can they lead? Are they proven? That's the kind of guys you want for civic authorities, much different than church authority. We got to make a differentiation between the two. We are not electing our pastor or our priest or our prophet. We're electing a president.
And one of the important things for us to remember, especially for this election cycle, is we've seen both these people in action. Mm-hmm. We've seen both of them in high elected jobs. One is vice president, one is president. So we can look at their record. We're not wondering what the future holds because we can look at the past and we can see our future with each of them. So it's an easier pick in a lot of cases.
Yeah, and I think that's absolutely true. You can go back and you can look at economic records. You could look at what they've done for the causes of righteousness and life and the family and everything else. And their records are going to speak volumes. And both of them, by the way, have blemishes that you can go to from a Christian perspective and be like, that did not help. That did not help bring justice or mercy or flourishing or righteousness or employment or wealth or anything like that. Both of them have knocks, but one of the things that I want to address, because this is another one of the things that people do when they come to the election, is they look back and they say, okay, yeah, maybe the economy was better under Trump, and we didn't get any wars, we didn't have the tremendous problems with the southern border that we have now, but he's so unlikable. As a leader, he just projects so gross, like he's so arrogant. I don't want that in a leader. And then over here, I've got, this had passed 3.5 years, which has been a train wreck, frankly. And so I'm just going to sit out. I'm just going to do nothing. And what I want to say is, like, you don't get a pass from participation in evil by doing nothing. In fact, if you're looking at two trains and both of them are going to potentially advance, let's say both of them advance evil, you have a moral obligation to prevent the one that's going to advance more evil. And if you do nothing and you say, you know what, I'm fine with the status quo, I'm fine with the way things are going now, so I'm just going to abstain and not vote at all. I think it's important to look at what the status quo is and to walk through what's going on right now in the country and just highlight some issues and just give some facts, because Americans, we have very short memories.
Yeah.
But I think it's important to say, man, look at what has happened in the very recent past. And we are in a really, really dire situation in our country to take action to fix it. And I want to pick the candidate that will do most to fix these problems. So you want to run through some of these?
Yeah, let's go. Let's start with some categories.
Pretty lengthy list. Let's start with economics. Like, when you look at that, what's the first thing that comes into your mind?
The economy.
Yeah, well, obviously.
Oh, yeah. It's like,
but what affects you most?
I think debt levels. I think things like housing prices. I think like,
as a millennial, you're still looking like, how in the world am I ever going to be able to afford a home? But like what you said, debt levels. Our debt level right now is $35 trillion.
The debt clock is terrifying.
It's terrifying. My son looks at it all the time and is like, Dad, look at this. Because when you look at it, it's $270,000 per taxpayer that we are in debt right now. And nobody seems concerned about fiscal restraint. We have added nearly $11 trillion to our debt since 2020.
Wow.
Our money supply, this is crazy. So like the Fed that just keeps printing money because we can't meet our bills and obligations, the money supply from 2009 to today has gone from 7 trillion to 19 trillion just in printing money. Almost tripled. That's 170% increase. And you wonder, like, why is there inflation? Why is all the stuff so shaky right now? And so from 2009, from that same time period, so we've increased the money supply $12 trillion, but we've also added 21 trillion in new debts.
How does that
Both
work out?
parties add. One party, the Democrats, spend more traditionally. Now you have rampant inflation, housing affordability's out the window. And here's what's crazy. We still have $73 trillion in unfunded liabilities from Social Security and Medicare that are coming at us that we don't have in our budgets any idea of how we're going to pay for it. So guess what that means? It's just going to add more. And that's just Social Security and Medicare. You know what? We're paying more than $1 trillion on the debt interest, the interest. $1 trillion every year just to keep up with the interest right now.
That's crazy.
That's going to keep growing because the debt's going to keep growing. And eventually you get 73 trillion and then you get more interest payments. And then we just keep printing and printing and printing. And eventually all of our foreign debtors and the people who lend us money and buy our bonds are going to go, I'm not sure they're a safe bet. What happens when all that comes about? We need somebody to take this stuff seriously.
I mean, a huge one for people my age, too, is student loan forgiveness and how that affects it all.
Yeah, and what that does is it sends a message that if I've worked hard, I paid off my student loans, I paid for my college and my obligations, and then somebody comes along and their debt is forgiven, it incentivizes not taking care of your responsibility, and it's incredibly unfair to the person who says, you know what, I'm going to go get a job in the trades, and I'm going to forego college because I can't afford it, where the person who couldn't afford it walks down that path and now is being rewarded for it, not to mention that we don't have the money for this.
Yeah.
And the Supreme Court has said you shouldn't do that he didn't have the authority to do it, and he did it anyway. We've got soaring energy costs. We've abandoned the Keystone Pipeline, where we used to be net exporters of oil for the first time last term. Now we're importing oil again, which means we're empowering OPEC and all these foreign countries. Here's a stat that I came across that's really sad because, you know, and with all of this spending, you would think, well, we must be really helping people.
Yeah.
We have 653,100 American homeless in 2023. That's the highest number ever recorded.
That's crazy.
By a lot. So we're not solving homelessness. You look at our civil liberties, right? And we all remember going through COVID where it was like, whoa. I mean, and if you're civil liberty minded like I am, it's like the government is doing this. Surely the people are going to say no. And it was one restriction and one mandate after another. I was having to write letters for people in our congregation saying that they had a religious objection to this because otherwise they were going to be fired. All the churches being closed, the states that started really clamping down on things that are constitutional guarantees that went out the window in the middle of a crisis, which should never happen. That was frightening. You had the dangerous weaponization of the Justice Department and lawfare that everybody's talking about,
Yeah.
and all these criminal cases and civil cases, and suing, you know, even RFK Jr. to keep him off the ballot in certain states because he's a threat to their elections. Like that's terrifying when you see the weaponization of justice. You get here's the one that really bothered me most. Take the substance of it off the table, but if you go back to the last election and you had the Hunter Biden laptop story that came out, and on that laptop came all this stuff that, you know, ties the Biden family to all these international deals that are questionable. You have really embarrassing stuff about Hunter Biden, which is unfortunate and tragic and sad. But what happened when they said this isn't real and they said it's Russian disinformation, you know what's terrifying is with the snap of a finger, in very short order, they were able to bring together 51 high-ranking intelligence officers to say it's all fake, it's Russian disinformation. So the state, the government, could pull together people that are supposed to be, you know, FBI officials, CIA officials, people that are supposed to be trusted with national security above the political realm, and they wrangled together 51 of them to say, oh yeah, it's fake, and then it turns out not to be fake, and yet they did that to ensure political victory, that's terrifying.
Yeah, that's really scary.
And so you go on. You've got proven collusion between the government and the big tech companies to censor speech. That came out in the Twitter files. Mark Zuckerberg
Recently admitted all that?
admitted it and apologized for it. So now we've got a government that's coming to them saying, hey, silence this side. Take down their post. Cancel them from these platforms. Why is that not more of a thing? That's terrifying.
And we should all fear that no matter what side you're on. because
100%.
Power changes very easily in this nation.
Yeah, I remember when I was a kid, people would always say, you know, I respect your right to an opinion. I don't have to agree with it, but I would die for your right to say it. I heard that all the time growing up. And now there's the First Amendment is like, it means nothing. With government pressuring people to do that, that's wild. And so the erosion of civil liberties and privacy and the way that the government can snoop on your technology platforms, like, are we good with this? Like, this is what the Bible's talking about, that when you empower authority, the more they get their tentacles around your life and they invade with no hesitation, the more miserable they're going to make your life, the more they're going to exploit you. The Bible teaches us that. And yet nobody does anything. Then you get to the issue that I think for Christians more than any is the most important issue, which is life.
Yeah.
Like, if there's a characteristic about our God as you go through the scriptures, he is a God that, like, his defining trait is he brings life from death.
Yeah.
He brings fertility to barrenness. He is the God of resurrection. He loves life. He's the creator of life. Life is a beautiful thing. And we live in a country that now, since Roe v. Wade in 1973, has committed more than 60 million abortions.
Wow.
And here's something that people don't know. Look it up. Last year, we had more abortions than before the Dobbs decision overturned Roe v. Wade.
I didn't know that.
So since the Supreme Court overturned Roe v. Wade, the number of abortions has gone up. What's this presidential campaign been about is we have to protect, we need more, we need to expand abortion rights. The number of abortions hasn't gone down. It's increased 12% since 2020. That's terrifying. And the idea is, oh, this is a right that's being infringed. It's growing right now. And we're going to do an episode that deals very much in depth with where the candidates stand on that issue, because it's alarming, quite frankly. Then you see the dissolution of the American family.
Yeah.
It's not held up with reverence anymore. Marriage rates are through the floor. You know, since 1970, the marriage rates are down 60%. A survey done found that only 45% of childless women under the age of 45 want children.
Wow.
We don't want children anymore. 28% of Gen Z adult women now identify on the LGBTQ spectrum, which means natural families are not going to come about. The fertility rates are well below replacement levels. Like, you just look at the American family and you see it, like, it's dissolving. The academic world, our schools and universities, can you remember the last 4 years of this? I mean, one after another, all the stuff going on with the Ivy Leagues and how atrocious it is what they're teaching our kids, and the woke poison that's, dividing everybody against each other and making everybody into either villains or victims. We did a whole series on that. We see teen suicide rates that just keep climbing. Like, when you go back to 2020, we were at record levels. Last year, it was 23% higher than 2020. It just keeps going. The mental health problems keep growing, the anxieties. We're training our kids up in a world of no purpose, no hope, no nothing. It's just the world's going to end. It's hyper fear. It's all of that stuff. We've got teachers' unions that are promoting genuinely pornographic books in schools, school libraries. I've seen these. They're unbelievable what's allowed in. And what's the response when you say you can't have that in schools? You're a book burner.
Yeah.
You're a Nazi. Like, this is crazy. Parental rights being under assault. Did you see where, like, California now? Have you seen this?
Yeah, can take your child.
Can take your child if you don't support their gender identity. Will literally take your child away from you. And other states around the country have started doing that. We're good with this? Like, are we okay with that? We have terrible academics to boot, by the way. Our schools, our academic standing around the world, it's tanking. We've got record numbers of youth that are being trained to hate the country. And it's no wonder why our military is now in a recruitment crisis. They cannot get people who find this country willing to die for. The idea of what was really wonderful about America is being lost. We've got insanity with all the gender and sexuality issues. We got soaring crime rates. That's a whole nother discussion. We've got the loss of civility and political discourse.
Yeah.
And increased polarization and multiple assassination attempts that now feel like, okay, is this going to become the norm?
Yeah, we
Like,
don't even care about them anymore.
the media just moves right on. Like, this is not something where we should stop and go, hold on a minute. There are things that are precious and sacred about our culture. This has to stop. Like,
Yeah.
we just move right past it and point fingers and blame and whip it up even more. And then we've got the worst border crisis that we've ever had in U.S. history. And it's this current administration that revoked the Remain in Mexico policy, that removed all effective measures, that assured us the whole time that there was no crisis. Remember all the press conferences?
Yeah.
Oh, there's no border crisis. We don't have a problem. And so we've got this massive infusion of between 10 and 20 million people that are here illegally. We've got a fentanyl crisis where deaths have increased 50% in the first 2 years of this administration. In 2022, there were 84,181 overdoses in the opioid crisis.
Wow.
And that's up 50% from 2020. There's hundreds of thousands of migrants that are not coming through the border, but are being flown here on planes from nations that are going in revolutionary upheaval. Venezuelans and Haitians and Cubans that are being flown all over the place. And guess what number 1 and number 2 are? Here in South Florida, Miami
Okay.
and Fort Lauderdale. This is our backyard, where it's like we don't have the capacity to absorb this many. We've now, one of the things that blows me away, and you see how much this is drawn for political power, is you have the U.S. Census, right? When it counts people, it counts citizens, it counts non-citizens, and includes them all. And whatever state they're counted in, that determines your congressional apportionment. So you get more representatives if you have more people. So what Congress tried to do this past year was to say, you know, people that are here illegally shouldn't be counted. They shouldn't get representation. Do you know that was defeated along party lines? Straight party lines. Like, why in the world would you want to count them? Why do you want them here? Why are you trying to get them on a fast path to citizenship? It's all about power at the expense of the nation. And you'd have a hard time convincing me that's not true. You've had big cities that have been like, we're collapsing under the weight of all of this extra burden of them coming here. You've got small towns that have been entirely upended with thousands and thousands of migrants coming in, and they're like, we can barely hold our head above water now, and they're just sinking. You've got weakness with America on the world stage that all started where? With that Afghanistan withdrawal, where we signaled an embarrassing withdrawal, where we left behind 13 dead soldiers, 9,000 American civilians, billions of dollars in weaponry, including planes and armored vehicles and helicopters and weapons, all left behind for the Taliban and their oppression of their own people. And what signal does that send to the rest of the world?
We're weak.
That you're weak. And so what happens? It's no surprise that you see Russia invade Ukraine. Oh, and by the way, we lifted the Iranian sanctions. This is disastrous. Releasing $6 billion to them, and then we're shocked that all of a sudden Hamas has all this money and weaponry to stage terror attacks, or Hezbollah, or the Houthis, that are all funded by the Iranian regime, where we released billions of dollars to them. We have a Chinese spy balloon that we detect over our country.
We just let it fly.
And do nothing about it. We see the rise of BRICS, which is the association of Brazil, Russia, India, China, and South Africa that are coming together, that constitutes 3.2 billion people. You have OPEC and BRICS both conspiring to abandon the US dollar as the international reserve currency, which would be devastating to our economy. There's nothing done about it. And you have promises that are maybe some of the most scary, where out of the mouth of this administration, you have promises that if they get power, they will change the governing structure. They're in favor of statehood for Puerto Rico. They're in favor of statehood for DC, which means, guess what? The political power balance shifts. You get 2 more seats in the Senate for both of those. And guess which way they lean? Oh, it just so happens.
Yeah.
And we're going to add Supreme Court justices, and we're going to do all of these very revolutionary ideas that will forever change the fabric of our country, as we've seen over the last 3 years, would only continue. And so if you're like me, I'm not crazy about my options.
No.
But when I look at the record that I have before me to choose from, one of those does way more harm.
Yeah.
And so it's one of those, hold your nose and choose the path that's going to give the greatest opportunity for less evil and less damage to come into the system. And to me, I think that's clear.
Yeah, and that all felt like a lot, and that was purposeful because we want it to feel like a lot. We want to say, okay, hey, these last 4 years, or 3.5, I guess, so far, is that what we want to continue? Do we want to continue down that route? And one of those things we want to do is saying, hey, apathy, if you just want to say, hey, I don't want any part of this, I'm just going to let it all go. Apathy in the face of evil like that is evil itself. And we have the choice, and we have the burden in some way, shape, and form to change that, to change our trajectory, not just for my future at my age, but for my daughter's future, for the generations that I want to be able to say, hey, I did something for you guys.
Totally agree. You know, one of the fascinating things about history, you know, there's the old saying, you know, history just repeats itself. There's nothing new under the sun. And when you go back and you look at Jesus's day, you know, he had political factions. They were religious, but they were political.
Yeah.
That would come to him, and everybody's vying for his opinion. And, you know, he's dealing with the Pharisees and the Sadducees and the Zealots and the Essenes and the Herodians and all these political parties that are always trying to trap him. And he never fit easily into any of them, right? But there was one time, and I love this story for what it teaches and it reminds us of. In the middle of a political season, it's so easy to be like, are you a Herodian or are you a Pharisee? You know, are you a Democrat or are you a Republican? And we start defining ourselves by these labels. And so one time Jesus had a couple of guys come up to him. It was a Herodian and a Pharisee. And so you've got one group of them that hates Rome. Rome is the oppressor. You shouldn't pay taxes to them. If you do, you're a sellout and a traitor to Israel. And then you got the Herodians that are like, well, we're getting the jobs, and you know, we love Herod. We love all the big government programs. I mean, their platforms are really interesting in comparison to today. And so they asked Jesus a question: should we pay taxes or not? Well, that's like a no-win question for him, right? If he says, don't pay taxes, well, then he's going to be crucified earlier for citing insurrection or rebellion against Rome. But if he says, pay taxes, then the Pharisees are like, oh, he supports Rome. He's a traitor. And it's kind of like today, where there's no good answer. Somebody's going to be mad at you. You know, I'm sure people are going to be mad at us for this one. But Jesus says, do you have a coin? Do you have a denarius? Let me see it. And he takes a denarius. And on the coin of that time, the denarius, is a picture that refers to the Caesar as the Son of God. It's blasphemous.
Yeah.
And the back of it, it refers to him as the Pontiff Maxim, the high priest, which is also blasphemous. And he's kind of challenging him, like, you want this? Like, you're obsessed with this blasphemous kind of coin? That's the hidden message there. But then he says, brilliant. He's really smart.
He's
as
Jesus.
God. But he says, whose image is on this coin? And what's the answer? Of course, it's Caesar's, right? And so then he just says this, and he says, give unto Caesar what is Caesar's, and give unto God what is God's. Which means, yeah, you have a political obligation. You have an obligation to pay taxes, even though the Roman government under Tiberius was wicked to the bone. But left unsaid is the greater message that we really need to take into our hearts, right? The coin belongs to Caesar because it bears his image. Left unsaid, and this is why they all marveled at him. Left unsaid is, well, then what bears God's image? If give unto Caesar what belongs to Caesar, okay.
Yeah.
Give unto God what belongs to God. What belongs to God? Well, then it's whatever bears his image. Well, what bears his image?
Humanity.
You do. I do. And so, you know, we can get into the political squabblings, but at the end of the day, what we need to realize is we're all made in the image of God. We owe our whole lives to him. Everything about us needs to yield to his plan. We belong to him. Give unto Caesar what's Caesar's. Stupid coin with a dumb image on it. Pay your taxes. But at the end of the day, you know what belongs to God? You do. Every bit of you. And so, in the midst of all the storm and all the decision and all the praying about who to vote for, the call is yield yourself to the Lord. Pray about all these things. And at the end of the day, your vote is the Lord's. What would please him? What would bring him glory? Cast that vote. That's what we're asking people to do.
That's good.
Thank you for watching. And join us next time as we go into part 3 in this series on voting as a Christian on In God We Trusted.